Welcome to the IDP Plus Advice Show for week 15. I'm your host, Ricky Rodrigue. We're going to talk about snaps and playing time for individual defensive players. We're going to talk about alignments. We're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about waivers, players to pick up, players to avoid. With that, let's get started. All righty. I want to begin by thanking everyone for all those that have been viewing and are listening to this show throughout the last several weeks. Really appreciate the loyalty. Hope I'm helping you all out with some great information to help you now get through your playoffs and into the championship and winning those championships. Please keep the feedback and comments coming here on YouTube. Post them below. I try and check them about every 24 hours or so, particularly on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights. So please keep those comments coming. Let me know what you like and don't like. As we typically do, we're going to go division by division so you can skip around on the broadcast. And with that, let's go ahead and start with the NFC North, and we're going to start with the Bears, who played against the 49ers. They played 62 snaps, a little bit less than average for a team. Kevin Byard, who had led the team in tackles for 4 weeks in a row with over 10 tackles, he only had 5 tackles, 3 solo, and 1 pass defense this week. He did play 100% of the snaps. Just one of those weeks for Byard. I'm still playing him. With Jaquan Brisker still on IR, not likely to come back this year. Elijah Hicks being out for the 3rd week in a row. Jonathan Owens played and started for the 3rd week in a row. He played 100% of the snaps as well. On these IDP Plus Start Sit show on Sundays, which I encourage you to join on this channel, it's Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern time, particularly with playoffs coming. We'll be there to help you. But I had predicted he'd have 8 tackles and 4 solo in that one. Well, I was close. He had 7 tackles and 5 solo, so I was close. He did have a pass defense, which was actually an interception. So another one of those players where in deeper leagues, if Hicks is out again, I'm comfortable playing him, particularly where there's some injuries, and you might be looking for a Winfield replacement potentially in deeper leagues. Okay, T.J. Edwards played 100% of the snaps, as did Tremaine Edmonds. Edwards led the team in tackles with 10, including a sack as part of that, and he also had a couple tackles for loss. The one other thing to mention, Gervin Dexter, for you folks in where you're playing defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman, he only played 21% of the snaps. I must be honest, I didn't see him leave the game. I didn't see reports of any injury. Clearly, I'm guessing that this was an injury. Watch injury reports. You may need a replacement for him. Okay, now moving on to the Lions, who played the Packers. Lions played an even 50 snaps. Now, last week they had jumped up to about average, a little bit above average at 67, but the weeks before that, 55 and 48. Hard to trust the Lions defensive players with those kind of snap rates, folks. And look, there wasn't many IDP stats to call out. Jack Campbell did play 100%. 8 tackles, 3 solo. With 50 snaps, that's actually not too bad, but that's all you're going to get. I'm not trusting Jack Campbell. We had a lot of questions on Sunday about rest of season and Jack Campbell versus other players, and Jack Campbell tended to be the lowest of all those linebackers because of the concerns of the snap count and the tackle efficiency as well. Now, with Alex Anzalone, Derek Barnes, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, and Malcolm Rodriguez all on IR, what did the team do at the other linebacker spot? They had this massive heavy rotation. Quan Alexander actually started the game, who they just signed off the Broncos practice squad, but he only played 34% of the snaps. Trevor Nowinski played 64%, but we're not playing Trevor Nowinski, folks. We're not doing that. He was a fool's gold earlier this year, you may recall. Zeke Turner, 34%. David Long, 32%. Ben Neiman, 2%. And even Jamal Adams played 16% in like a third safety / really more of a box third linebacker, I should say. He played 16% of the snaps. The net all that, you can't play any of these folks. Any of these are not playable. I'm not even trusting Campbell unless I'm really desperate, to be honest with you. So Darius Smith, his snap count went all the way down from 82% to 42%. Once again, I didn't see any injury reports. And with all the injuries they had on the defensive line, to Aleem McNeil went out, and there was one other one who's slipping my mind off the top of my head who also went out again. They are just so banged up, but yet he only played 42%. Uh, be careful with playing him. Watch the injury reports. He did get a sack in that time, which was great. He's been productive getting sacks the last couple of weeks, but be very careful with playing him. Now back to the Packers side of the equation versus the Lions. Um, the Packers played 80 snaps on defense, and so if you average, you take the 50 from the Lions, the 80 from the Packers, that's 130 divided by 2, 65 snaps. That's roughly an average. That was just such a nice, clean way of making that point that I've made for several weeks, that the average number of defensive snaps per team is usually 65 to 66. That was just a nice, great example within one game of showing that with nice round numbers as it worked out. Isaiah McDuffie ended up playing 100% of the snaps with Edgerrin Cooper out. And what had been happening is with Cooper out and with McDuffie being in Merrick Wilson, there's a little bit of a rotation, but neither one of them ever played really 100%. McDuffie all the way to 100% led the team with 15 total tackles, only 4 of which were solo, but he was running all over the field, chasing folks down. But once again, this was on 80 snaps. And I don't expect 100% snap count to continue even if Cooper's out. It just feels like with the way the Lions ran the ball so much and want to run the ball, that's why we saw McDuffie for 100% of the snaps. I'm betting a pull back to the 80% range, according to Ricky's crystal ball, which has been pretty good this year, folks. You have to admit. I know I've missed some, but I've hit on a bunch of these speculations, and that's one of them. I expect to happen as well. Quay Walker had 10 tackles, 6 solo, including tackle for loss. Eric Wilson played 55% of the snaps as that third linebacker, but he only had 3 tackles, one of which was solo. So we're not playing Eric Wilson. We're managing our expectations around Isaiah McDuffie at the linebacker position for the Packers. The secondary, which has just continued to be this roller coaster for the Packers. Jair Alexander was out yet again. Carrington Valentine played 57% of the snaps at the corner. Eric Stokes played 52%. Keyshawn Nixon, now let's talk about him. He's so valuable when he plays in that slot role in particular, not quite as much on the outside. Let's talk about what happened. He played 99% of the snaps in total. He ended up with 10 tackles, 3 solo, and 2 pass defense. But where he had played the previous 2 weeks 92 and 93%, in week 14 he only played 78% out wide. Why was that? Well, because of so many injuries at the safety position. Xavier McKinney did play 100%. We'll come back to him in a second. But Javon Bullard left the game with an ankle injury. Evan Williams left the game with a concussion. So Xavier McKinney played 100% of the snaps. He played 39% deep, which wasn't abnormal for what he's been playing. He usually plays about 40% or 60% deep. This happened to be a roughly 40% week. Zane Anderson, who stepped in at safety with the Evan Williams injury, it was by the way, it added up to 100%. Just FYI, Williams played 34% of the snaps. Zane Anderson played 66%. So it was a like-for-like switch out. Zane played 49% of the snaps deep. He only had 4 tackles, 2 solo on those 66% of the snaps. Now remember, that was on 80 snaps in total. When he's playing that deep and he has a backup safety, hard to trust if Williams is out this coming week. Williams is hard to trust because in the snaps that he played, he actually played 63% deep as well. So Javon Bullard left the game with that ankle injury, as I mentioned. He is expected to be week to week. Once again, a complete mess. Jair Alexander could come back. If that happens, you could see Alexander and either Valentine or Stokes on the outside, which would be great news for Keyshawn Nixon going back to the slot since Bullard was injured. And then you have McKinney and Zane Anderson as your safeties, with Zane Anderson probably playing 60 or 65% deep and McKinney playing 40 to 45% deep. That's how I think this is going to shake out for the playoffs, folks, when you're making those determinations. One other thing of interest, The Packers actually drafted 3 safeties. We talked about Bullard, who's played a safety slash slot role. We've talked role. Let me try that again. We've talked about Bullard playing both a slot and a safety role. Evan Williams primarily playing safety. Keaton Oladipo was the third safety they drafted, who's basically got no time on defense. But granted, Zane Anderson was the one that played, but there's even a risk that Oladipo, they were very high in their rookie draft class, but with all the other rookies, he hasn't gotten in yet. Maybe Oladipo gets a few snaps as well. Stay away from Zane Anderson is the net of all that, folks. Let's move over to the Vikings, and we'll close out there the NFC North. The Vikings played a whopping 74 snaps. Well, what's interesting about the Vikings, you look at the last 3 weeks, 14, 13, 12. They played 74, 82, and 76 snaps. The 3 weeks prior to that, going further back into the season, they played only 59, 44, and 54. So there's been a significant change that is causing them to be on the field more. Now, this was a blowout game, though. So even though they're on the field for 74 snaps, a lot of the players did not play their typical snap counts. For example, Blake Cashman only played 85% of the snaps. He did tie for the team lead with the team lead with 7 tackles, 5 solo, got a pass defense, and also got a quarterback hit, which is nice as well. Brian Asamoah played the other 15% in garbage time late in the game. Josh Metellus played 91%. Cam Bynum played 96%. Harrison Smith played 85%. I think Brian Flores likes to mess with us, just like Shanahan used to do with some of the running back rotations in the past, and just drive us nuts. But anyway, Metellus just playing 91% of the snaps. He only played 7% deep. With Ivan Pace on IR, Kamu Grugier-Hill, remember last week we talked about he played very little in that number 2 linebacker spot. This week he only played 23%. Josh Metellus actually played a lot more in that number 2 linebacker spot as well. Now, even with that, he only had 7 tackles, 5 of which were solo, a pass defense, and an interception. But I expect that to continue as long as Pace is on IR. Okay? But if there's been one area the crystal ball hasn't been perfect, it's been on predicting the Vikings' safeties and their alignment. Okay? Bynum ended up playing 59% deep. Harrison Smith, on his 85% of the snaps, played 43% of those deep, which is a little bit less. He usually plays more deep, but once again, game flow, the blowout, etc. Don't read too much into that. Patrick Jones was inactive due to an injury, so Dallas Turner actually played the second highest percent of snaps that he played all year. He played 35% of the snaps. I'll give the guy credit, man. When he is on the field, he is freaking fast. Still light in the pants, as we've talked about in the past, on some of these past episodes. He did get 3 tackles, 2 solo, and a quarterback hit. Still not someone we can play. Still someone we want for Dynasty, but we're not using him in the playoffs. And you might have seen Jamin Davis, the former Commanders first-round pick, who the Vikings had signed off the Green Bay practice squad after Washington released him. He only played 12% of the snaps, folks. He did get 1 sack, which is great, which means he got a tackle, a solo tackle, a tackle for loss, and a quarterback hit. Y'all know how that works by now, or at least, and if you're new, that's how it works. But anyway, not someone we're picking up, not someone we're playing. Let us now move to the NFC East, folks. And let me add the banner, which I should have done for the NFC North. And I apologize for not doing that. The Commanders were on bye, so we will start with the Cowboys in the Monday night game against the Bengals. They played 71 snaps on defense, which is more than average, of course. The bad news of this, DeMarvion Overshown, who was just blossoming and doing extremely well. He left with a knee injury. It was reported on Tuesday that he tore every CL, for lack of a better term. He lost his ACL, his MCL, his PCL. All of them got torn. I wouldn't be surprised if he had an RCL, SCL, TCL. All of them that got torn. Feel really bad for the guy. A really great talent. 2 knee injuries in a row. When you tear all 3 of those, like that's almost like to the Nick Chubb proportion of what he had the year before, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't quote me on that. I apologize if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that is correct. But he could miss almost all of next year as well, unfortunately, team. So as you're thinking about your redraft leagues for next year and the drafts, you're going to hear all these positive reports about how he's probably ahead of schedule and he's recovering, all that kind of stuff. But we're not picking him up on our recovery. I mean, on our redraft leagues. Even if you have a injured reserve spot, if you don't have too many of those, that's going to be hard to do to keep him in that spot for 13, 14, 15 weeks potentially, or potentially be out the whole year. Okay, with that, Maris Lufau played the other 32% of the snaps that Overshown didn't play. Overshown played 70, Lufau played 32, okay, basically about 100. Lufau did have a couple of big splash plays. He ended up with 1.5 sacks. However, that's all he did, okay? That was the extent of his stats, was tied to those 2 plays. That was part 1 for you to know. Part 2 is Damone Clark was inactive this week. And previously, when Eric Kendricks was out and hurt, Overshown moved to Kendrick's spot, and it was Clark that moved into the Overshown spot in that situation when Overshown moved to the Mike spot where Kendricks played. It wasn't Lufau. Now, and there's been times when earlier this year Clark was inactive, and then that still happened. So if you decide to play Lufau in your playoffs here in Week 15, know that it is a significant risk to do it. Okay, a significant risk, because it could very well be Damone Clark getting those snaps. What I'm probably going to do is try and get one or both of them onto my roster if they're out there in free agency. I'm sitting them on my bench unless I'm desperate for some reason. When you all will move to the next round of the playoffs from Week 15 to Week 16, using the advice from this show and our Start Shit show on Sunday mornings, and all the other great advice from all our other wonderful, talented people on the IDP Plus team that y'all probably listen to and follow. When you make it to Week 16, then you will see how this plays out, and then you can determine if you can play Lufau or Clark in Week 16 in the semifinals. Okay, Donovan Wilson. He was second on the tackles on the team behind Eric Kendricks. Kendricks had 12. He had a typical Kendricks line of 12 tackles, 8 solo, a little bit more than normal, but a typical line for him. Wilson had 9 tackles, 5 solo, got a half a sack, and that means he also gets a quarterback hit. Now, that is his, let's see if I got this right. He's had, with those 9 tackles, were his highest for the year. He's had 1 game with 8 tackles, 1 game with 7 tackles, nothing else above 6. What does that scream? That screams outlier. That screams we're not going to chase this, folks. So don't chase a Donovan Wilson. Cowboys finally had their top 3 cornerbacks healthy this week. So Deron Bland, Trevon Diggs, Jordan Lewis, all 3 of them played 100% of the snaps. Lewis played most of the snaps in the slot. Lewis had the most tackles out of all those cornerbacks with 7 tackles, 4 solo. So if you need a slot cornerback, I can't remember who the Cowboys play this coming week. My apologies. They're playing a team with a lot of 11 personnel out there on the field. Jordan Lewis might be the one to play, not Deron Bland. We're not chasing last year's points and interceptions and return for touchdowns and all that stuff. That was last year. Lewis looks like the best bet at this point in time. Giants versus the Saints. Okay, the Giants played 68 snaps on defense in a game that really set the NFL backwards. It felt like in a 14-11 game. Oh gosh, it was painful to watch my Saints. Very painful. I'll just leave it at that. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Of course, Dexter Lawrence got put on IR. Hated to lose him for the defensive tackle required leagues. There's no one on the Giants to replace him that we would put into our fantasy lineups. Bobby Okereke was injured and he was inactive. And by the way, you would have thought that with that, the Saints would have been able to just gash them up the middle and just run and run like many other teams have. Well, that didn't freaking happen for the Saints. I digress once again. Micah McFadden ended up moving into the green dot position. He played the Okereke role. He played 100% of the snaps for the first time this year. He's a very efficient tackler. He had 11 tackles, 8 solo. including 5 tackles for loss. How bad was the Saints' offensive line? Okay. So, and the other question is, why wasn't Okereke doing that well? Well, maybe it's because it was just Saints. Okay. Um, if Okereke is out, we're playing McFadden next. Absolutely. The number 2 linebacker became Darius Musau, the rookie. He played 76% of the snaps, so he basically went into the old McFadden role. He had 8 tackles and 7 solo. As a side note, Isaiah Simmons played about 25% of the snaps, but not just at linebacker. But anyway, Musau in deep leagues, 76% of the snaps. That's like a number 4 type of linebacker. Somewhere in that 40 to 48 range, probably. Not trusting him, but if you're desperate, there's someone to pick up for you. Just know what you're getting. You're getting the Micah McFadden clone, who might not be as efficient a tackler as Micah McFadden was or is. Unfortunately, Tyler Nubin, one of the top safeties over the past several weeks, hurt his ankle, left the game after only 53% of the snaps, and only had 5 tackles. Now, Dane Belton is the one that subbed in for him. Dane played 57% of the snaps, 5 tackles, one of which was solo. Belton only played 18% of the snaps deep. Jason Pinnock, who the previous weeks was in that like 65, 67% range, played 81% of the snaps deep. That would seem to imply they do not trust Dane Belton deep. So if you need someone, if Nubin is out, now I'm not expecting Buda Baker type numbers or Tyler Nubin numbers or Jeremy Chin when he was on that hot streak type of numbers from Dane Belton, but Belton is someone you can certainly consider playing if Nubin is out. Okay, lastly, with the NFC East, the Eagles, they played against the Panthers and played 71 snaps on defense. Man, that dude who bet 3.1 million on the Eagles to win outright, I bet you he was sweating his you know what off when Leggett dropped that pass, because that could have been an upset, should have been an upset, but he let Bryce Young down, he let Carolina down, and he saved that bettor who bet 3.1 million to win 400,000. Wouldn't have done that one for sure. Okay, so Nakobe Dean led the team with tackles with 12, 9 of which were solo. He played 97% of the snaps. Zach Bowen with another outstanding stat line on 99% of the snaps. He had 11 tackles, 6 solo, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits. Now, we've been talking about him last couple of weeks. He did play 23% on the D line, but not as much on the edge of the D line. He did a lot of rushing from the middle if you got to see some of that game. So that certainly helped versus when he was playing more on the D line and more on the edge. So that's good news. Will that continue? Don't know. But if they have him blitzing up the middle against certain teams, that could add to his value, particularly with big play scoring where you get bigger points for sacks, quarterback hits, tackle for loss, etc. Cooper DeJean was back up to 86% of the snaps. I actually played him in the Kings Classic League that we do out of Canton, Ohio, at the Fantasy Football Expo every year. And because Carolina does play a lot of 3-wide sets. And so with that, he played 86% of the snaps, got 5 solo tackles and a tackle for loss. And for those in return yardage leagues, with Britton Covey getting hurt the week before, DeJean took back over the punt return role and got some punt return yardage for you. So if you're debating between someone and it looks like Covey's going to be out again, Britton Covey, the punt return wide receiver, maybe that's a tiebreaker for you related to DeJean. And that completes the NFC East. Let's move on to the NFC South, everybody. And with that, let's start with the Bucs, who played the Raiders. They played about an average, they scored 67 snaps, let's call it. Levante David played 100% of the snaps, led the team with 7 tackles. Lousy 7 tackles, not that great. He did get a sack, thank goodness, and he got a fumble recovery, so that boosted up his stats quite a bit. KJ Britt was inactive again. And JJ Russell, you may remember somebody on this very show last week saying, in deep leagues, Vi Jones, or actually I know him as Levi Jones because that was his name at high school. He went to the same high school that my sons went to a little bit later, but he went to the same high school. But anyway, I digress. Levi Jones actually ended up playing 60% of the snaps, so he played that number 2 role. With that, he had 5 tackles, 3 which were solo. Antonio Greer, who was a little bit worried about on because they called him up from the practice squad on Saturday, um, he only ended up playing 3% of the snaps. So Levi Jones in deep leagues where you might be desperate, I think assuming J.J. Russell is out again this week, could get you about 60% of the snaps, but not someone I'm necessarily rushing to put in my lineup. Now let's talk about the defensive secondary for the Bucs, which has been similar to the Packers. Another one of those roller coaster secondaries for us. Jordan Whitehead was put on IR. Mike Edwards was inactive. Antoine Winfield left the game after 24% of the snaps. So when he left the game, Kavion Merriweather ended up playing the deep safety role. Playing more the Winfield role. Sorry, I misread my notes real quick. And he had 7 tackles, 4 solo, 1 sack. So he played 56% deep. Let me just clarify that. Of the 82 snaps, 82% of the snaps he played in total. But he went more into the Winfield role. Christian Izien, he ended up playing 97% of the snaps, and he played 49% deep. He only had 4 tackles, 2 solo, and a tackle for loss. He did not play the slot role. The reason he didn't play the slot role was Tyke Smith played the slot role. He played 64% of the snaps, but the Raiders play a lot of 2 tight end personnel with Bowers and with Michael Mayer. When that happens, he's not on the field quite as much, and that also impacts the counting IDP stats that Tyke Smith puts up. Tavier Thomas actually played 16% of the snaps, and 82% of those were deep as well. What does all that say? Winfield's week to week. He's going to definitely miss week 15, so that's known. Between Merriweather, Izien, Tyke Smith, Thomas, we're not playing any of those guys. We're not playing any. Mike Edwards, if he comes back and he's active, we're not playing him either. We're not taking the chance based on the rotations, who might play in the slot, who might play deep. We're just not going to take that chance, folks. Not in the first round of playoffs, which most of you are talking about in week 15. Kalijah Cansey, to wrap up the Bucs, didn't get another sack, but he did have 3 quarterback hits. So he had 5 sacks in the previous 5 games. Did not get one this week, but he got 3 quarterback hits. That bodes well for the rest of the year for him. Let's talk about the Falcons real quick. They only played 60 snaps on defense. The week before, they only played 46. We had another blowout game here. Caden Ellis at linebacker was the only one that played 100% of the snaps. He played, and luckily on the 60 snaps, he was pretty productive with 10 tackles, 7 solo. He got a sack, tackle for loss, and 2 quarterback hits. So very nice for Caden Ellis. Landman and Troy Anderson warned you all that when Anderson came back, this was something to worry about. Landman played 33% of the snaps, only had 3 assisted tackles. Anderson played 48%, 2 tackles, 2 solo, 1 quarterback hit. Landman seemed to be playing more of the earlier downs. Anderson tended to be playing more of the obvious passing downs. The team only played 60 snaps after 46 last week. The offense is struggling with Cousins. This is just not a good recipe. We're staying away from Landman and Anderson. We're still playing Ellis. The Falcons had 4 sacks this week after 5 the previous week. Not sure what they're doing differently. I haven't been able to study that and do the research, and apologies for that. But we're still not chasing Arnold Ebiketie, who had a sack this week after having 2 the previous week, but he only played 33% of the snaps. So we're not going to chase because of that snap percentage on a low snap count as well. We're not going to do that, okay, team? Jesse Bates played 71% of his snaps deep. He did end up with 9 tackles the week before, but we're not chasing Jesse Bates. Remember when we talked a couple of weeks ago, he had that outlier game. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago, I believe, that he had the 9 tackles. Apologies. And we said, let's not chase that outlier game, and that's where we still are with Bates. Okay, let's move to the Panthers versus the Eagles. Very surprisingly, from a game flow perspective, the Panthers only played 58 snaps on defense. That is the first time all year that their snap count on defense was in the 50s. Their previous low was 64. There's a lot more closer to 70 than there was towards the 50s. Let's just leave it at that. The momentum since Bryce Young has come back in, and the positives, even though they didn't win against the Eagles, and some of the veteran leaders they have, like the Thielens and the Clowneys and so forth, they're making a difference in the Canales, the head coach. So oftentimes when a team is not doing well, they're out of the playoff hunt, where we get more and more leery about playing their players. I don't have that concern about the Panthers yet. Josie Jewell played 100% of those 58 snaps. He had a very nice line with 10 tackles, 5 solo, a sack and a half, 2 TFLs, and 2 quarterback hits. Trevin Wallace played 66%, which is what we've been roughly seeing, high 60s, low 70s kind of thing. He only had 6 tackles, 3 solo. That's what you can generally expect from him. There might be an outlier game, but someone we're not necessarily playing everybody. Nick Scott did not get activated from IR. As a result, Jordan Fuller and Xavier Woods both played 100% of the snaps at safety again this week. Nick Scott, there's a even better chance than last week that he's activated this week. And as I talked about last week, he was playing ahead of Fuller before he got injured and went on injured reserve, he being Scott. So there's a risk of playing Fuller if Scott is activated. However, with the good karma going on with the Panthers, I'm feeling a little bit different than last week, that I think Fuller may stay in the lineup, but I'm only playing him in deep leagues where I'm desperate, because that could be risky. You could end up with a goose egg if Nick Scott ends up playing 100% of the snaps. So there's your once again, your public broadcast announcement for this week related to the safety positions of the Panthers. A'Shawn Robinson continues to shine at defensive tackle. 78% of the snaps once again, 5 tackles, 2 solo, 1.5 sacks, a couple of quarterback hits. We're still playing A'Shawn Robinson, folks. Jadeveon Clowney was inactive with an injury. DJ Wanham stayed in that mid 70% range at 74%. He's had at least 5 combined tackles in 3 or 4 games played this year. He's had a sack in 3 or 4 games. The Cowboys are next. Cowboys just gave up 3 sacks to Bengals, including 2 edge players, Hendrickson and Osai. That could be good for Wanham or Clowney this coming week. You heard it here. That could be a big play opportunity. Last week's Fool's Goal that I warned you about, Amari Barno, remember? He had 4 tackles, 3 solo, a sack, tackle for loss, quarterback hit. I told you, he only played 11% of the snaps, folks. So what happened this week? He played 22% of snaps. Wow, double. That's fantastic. You got 1 assisted tackle. When I warn you about these Fool's Golds, trust me, I'm usually pretty right in that old crystal ball on the Fool's Gold. All righty. I've mentioned it once, but let me mention it again here as we're transitioning divisions. IDP Plus the IDP Plus Start Sit Show. I've really got to start saying that much slower. Is going to be this Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can get your questions in early before the show starts. If we start running out of time and you got your questions in later, you join late, you can use the super chat function. So for basically 99 cents, we'll guarantee you we'll answer your question. So take advantage of that super chat if you get in late, but we'll be there to help you out, to help you set your lineups for this big playoff week. Let's move to the NFC West. Cardinals versus the Seahawks. They played 64 snaps on defense. Buda freaking Baker played 100% of the snaps, 18 tackles, 8 solo tackle for loss. He got banged up a little bit, just got taped right back up and went back in. That dude plays hard and all. I'm going to go to a quick tangent for those of you in Dynasty Leagues. He's a free agent at the end of this year. The rookie, Dadrian Taylor Demerson. If you got room to stash somebody, that is someone. I don't typically like to stash a lot of safeties, but that is a safety you could stash. He could end up playing in that Baker role next to Thompson next year, and that'd be incredible if they let Baker go from free agency. Okay, Dynasty tidbit, we move on. Jalen Thompson was out with an illness. Let me try that again. Take 2. Jalen Thompson, take 3, was added to the injury report on Saturday with an illness, which Made us a little bit nervous, but he did end up playing 100% of the snaps, 6 tackles, 2 solo. Not a great line this particular week for Jalen Thompson, unfortunately. Kaiser White had a fantastic week, 100% of the snaps, 13 tackles, 4 solo. You might have noticed Seattle tried to run the ball just a tidbit with Charbonnet and with McIntosh both. That certainly helped White's stats. It didn't help Mac Wilson, unfortunately, who was back down a little bit to 84%. I should have labeled him as fool's gold as I typically do when he had that great week in week 13, because in week 14 he went back to a typical Mac Wilson line, 5 tackles, 2 solo, and a quarterback hit. The week before he had 7 tackles, 2 sacks, etc. That was fool's gold, folks. He returned to normal. There was no team sacks, so not really much else to talk about on the Cardinals. Let's move to the 49ers versus the Bears. Serious blowout game when you're around the halftime point and the Bears have either 2 or 4 yards of total offense, and the 49ers had over 300. So Eberflus was not missed in certain ways, but the way the defense has continued to worsen as things progress, and the Gervin Dexter injury certainly didn't help them either. Now we talked about earlier. But I digress on the Bears. Back to the 49ers. It was a blowout game, so that means a lot of folks aren't playing 100% of the snaps. So let's talk about what happened. Nick Bosa was inactive, and it looks like he won't be active for the Thursday night game against the Rams, the 49ers versus the Rams on Thursday night. That's unfortunate news for people that really need him from an edge perspective. The good news is, though, is it sure sounds like in week 16 that Bosa has a great opportunity to be active. So figure out week 15, advance week 16, then you'll be able to put Bosa back into your lineup. At the linebacker front, Fred Warner played 87% of the snaps. He only had 3 tackles and 1 solo. He left during junk time at the very end. That ankle that supposedly was fractured in week 4, that isn't exactly going to heal when you're running around and playing tackle, tackling people and hitting people and so forth. And they're not putting him, despite that admission, they're not putting him on the injury report if you watch it. But with that productivity, I am absolutely looking to play someone in my lineups during the playoffs instead of Fred Warner. Devondre Campbell only played 64% of the snaps. He ended up leading the team with 7 tackles, 6 of which were solo. D. Winters played about 51% of the snaps, if I remember correctly. I should have put that into my notes. Sorry about that. But it felt like there was a little bit of a Campbell and Winters kind of a little bit more of a rotation going. Then Campbell came out once again in junk time as well. And then we talked last week, and I didn't necessarily make a prediction, but I told you it's something we need to watch out for. The 49ers won this game against the Bears. They still have a chance at the playoffs. But as things proceed, if Warner has that ankle injury, Campbell not playing that well, do we see Greenlaw moving into that Warner role and Warner just being taken out for the rest of the year once the 49ers out of the playoff chase? Do we see Winters playing the Devondre Campbell spot because Campbell's not for the long term for the 49ers? And they have, they're going to have big salary cap problems and they're going to have to sign Purdy and all that kind of stuff, and they need cheap people. So I expect Greenlaw to be a free agent at the end of this year leaving. Expect Campbell to leave, and we could see Warner and Winters in the future potentially. But for the rest of this year, could be Greenlaw and Winters, folks. Once they get out of the playoff race, just keep that in mind. I expect Greenlaw to be more productive than what we're seeing from Warner right now, but maybe not putting up the 10 or 11 tackles that a very healthy Warner might do in a given week. So that's the outlook on the 49ers linebackers from Ricky, who you can follow at Ricky Rod 66, by the way. Okay, at the safety position, Talanoa Hufanga returned from IR. We were wondering what was going to happen and who was going to go to the bench when he came back. The answer was Jair Brown went to the bench. So Hufanga played 74% of the snaps. Once again, coming back from an injury plus the blowout game, he only played 74% snap, expected to be closer to 100 as we move forward. And he played 51% of those snaps deep, though, folks. That's something to be a little bit concerned about. Malik Mustafa matched Hufanga from a stats perspective with 5 tackles and 2 solo. He played 58% deep. So we had talked about previously how Jair Brown was playing a little bit closer to the line, and Mustafa was deeper, which was a little bit more surprising than, versus what we were expecting. We expected to be flipped. Um, Mustafa did play deep more than Hufanga, but Hufanga did play a distressing 51% deep. That does make me a little bit nervous, a little bit leery, particularly since he did play 100% of the snaps. I expect him to get there, but I'd be a little bit worried about playing him in my fantasy playoffs if I have other options. The Bears led the league in sacks given up, and they certainly continued that trend by giving up 6 sacks to the 49ers. Um, 3 of those were for Yetur Gross-Matos, so he had a career day with 4 tackles, 4 solo, 3 sacks, and then the corresponding 3 tackles for loss and 3 quarterback hits. We're not going to chase Yetur Gross-Matos, folks. He won't be playing the Bears. Sorry, offensive line with a quarterback who holds the ball too long. Shout out to Sean Teague as well, because we got a question from one of our people that joined the IDP Plus Start Sit show on Sunday. So you can find him at Sean8386. So someone asked about Leonard Floyd, and Sean was all on the Leonard Floyd train. I supported Sean. I wasn't as passionate as Sean was, but sure enough, Sean was right in that Leonard Floyd picked up 2 sacks. He had 2 tackles, 2 solos, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits. So the 2s across the board. So 2 big plays. But Sean was spot on. Once again, another one of those things. Join us for the IDP Plus Start Sit show. Don't expect that every week from Gross-Matos or Floyd. The matchup was right. Going on to the Rams. The Rams, for that high-scoring game, only played 60 snaps because the Bills were just going through them so quickly. Is what happened. The previous 4 weeks, they played 73, 77, the 53 outlier, and then 80. So usually in the 70s to near 80. 60 this past week. Christian Roseboom played 80% of the snaps, led the team with 8 tackles, 3 solo. When he's out in the field, because he hustles so much, he is the efficient tackler. Doesn't make him a very good linebacker from a pro perspective, but he is efficient. Some of this snap count and the way Bills went up and down the field so quickly really hurt the counting stats for IDPs. There was no non-cornerback that had more than 4 combined tackles for the Rams. That's pretty bad. Now, Omar Spates played 60% of the snaps. Cam Crow, 93. Quentin Lake, 100. Cam Kinchin, 78. Jalen McCullen was all the way up to 40%. But yet none of them had more than 4 combined tackles. When I say combined, solo/assisted in total. Also keep in mind for both linebackers and safeties with the Rams, no word on Troy Reed or John Johnson yet in terms of them being activated from IR. There's been no discussion about that so far going into the Thursday night game. So if you need Roseboom, if you're in a deep league, you need Spates, you play him. But just watch out if Reader gets activated before Thursday, just in case, although I haven't heard anything at this point in time. Wrapping up the NFC and the NFC West specifically, let's talk about the Seahawks, who played 71 snaps. Tyrese Knight only played 82% of the snaps, which is about rough what he's been playing, but he ended up leading the team with 12 tackles, 3 solo, 2 pass defense. Feels like a bit of an outlier. They did play a little bit more than average snaps, so we still prefer Ernest Jones over Tyrese Knight. Let's be careful there, particularly at about 82% of the snaps. Ernest Jones played his 100%, had 8 tackles and 6 solo, and got an interception, which means he got a pass defense as well. Leonard Williams continues his hot streak. Now, granted, he didn't get a sack, but on 70% of the snaps, he had 7 tackles, 3 solo, 2 tackles for loss, and a pass defense. The man continues to be a beast in these defensive tackle-required leagues. Julian Love played 100% of the snaps. He played 72% of those deep, 63% the week before that, 74% the week before. That is going to impact his counting stats. Kobe Bryant played 100% of the snaps once again. Only 4 tackles. He did get that interception, which gives him pass defense as well, which is great. But when you're playing 82% of the snaps deep, as Kobe did this last game, and 88, 90 of the weeks before, you're not going to get that tackle floor, that tackle baseline that you would really like to have. You're really relying on the big plays. Dangerous to play Kobe Bryant. We've been warning about that. Rayshon Jenkins, third week back. His snap count has gone from 50% to 40 to 35%. He got a cheap sack on either the last play or second to last play. Don't go chasing that. We're not playing Rayshon Jenkins. There is no sacks from the edge players. So let's talk about their snap time. So Uchenna Nwosu played 30% of the snaps in his first game back. There was only his second game of the year, though. Got injured preseason, came off of injured reserve, got hurt again in that one game. First game back, they took it easy on him, only 30% of the snaps. Mafe played 52%, Derek Hall 56%, Draymond Jones, who plays a little bit edge and also a little bit rushes from the interior sometimes, 58%. None of them got a sack this past week. As Nwosu's snap count elevates and snap percent elevates, it's going to take away from some of those others, which makes this more risky to play any of these Hawks edge defenders as we head to playoffs. Okay, let's move to the AFC East. And as I'm doing that, I've got to put a plug for IDP Plus, folks. Great articles, both from a fantasy and props perspective. We've got rankings of both offensive positions and individual defensive player positions. We've got great tools such as our snap count tool, our injury report, team fantasy points allowed by position for both offense and IDP, weekly fantasy finishes by position for each offensive player and IDP player. We've got the great fantasy YouTube channel. We've got the YouTube bets channel. Please join the family. By the way, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't, as a side note. And but join the family. We got 20% off with the code props, as you can see to the side of me. Okay, let's go to the AFC East. Ricky's going to pause real quick to get a swig. And we're going to start with the Buffalo Bills, who played a whopping 77 snaps against the Rams. Rapp and Hamlin, the two safeties, both played 100% of the snaps. Both of them had 13 tackles. Rapp had 8 solo. Hamlin had 7 solo. Where this gets interesting is at the linebacker position, everyone. Bernard played 100% of the snaps, 10 tackles, 4 solo. A little bit light for 77 snaps. Very disappointing. Matt Milano played 84% of the snaps, only had 3 tackles, 2 solo, and a tackle for loss. That's not very good, particularly when you're talking about 84% of 77, not of around 65 or 66. Not good. What's interesting is because he's a leader, I think he also wears a C for a captain. I don't think they'll take him out. Dorian Williams, for the second week in a row, had no stats, no defensive snaps. Someone in actually this Kings Classic League decided to drop Dorian Williams, and I actually snapped him up because between the injury proneness of both Bernard and Milano, plus if there's concerns about Milano's, productivity, maybe Dorian Williams works his way back into the lineup. So I'm stashing him on the end of my bench, he being Dorian Williams. I'm not playing Milano, and that's how we're going to roll with the linebackers. As a side note, none of the Bills got a sack for this game, so we're going to move on from the Bills. We're going to move to the Dolphins next against the Jets. The Dolphins played a very nice 69 snaps. Jordan Brooks led the way at the linebackers. He played 100% of the snaps. 9 tackles leading the team, 4 of which were solo, and he got a sack and a pass defense as well as part of all of that. Anthony Walker came back from the hamstring injury. This is one where my forecast and prediction was not correct. I'll be honest with you guys when I'm wrong. And I thought Tyrell Dodson would hold on to that spot when he replaced Walker, when Walker went out with the hamstring injury the previous week. Walker comes back from the hamstring injury, played 91% of the snaps, and he finished with 7 tackles, 4 which were solo. The other 9%, Tyrell Dodson did play. The reason he played him is Walker left temporarily with a hamstring concern, got it checked out on sideline, went back in because of the having missed the previous time. They were being cautious for a little bit. So what does this mean? It means I expect Walker to be the starter along with Jordan Brooks at those two linebacker positions that are normally 100% for the Dolphins. Do I want to trust Anthony Walker in my lineups with his injury history? The answer is no, I don't really trust him. If I'm desperate and in deeper leagues, then maybe I play him. But otherwise, I'm looking for other options, and I'm certainly not playing Tyrell Dodson given what we saw this past Sunday. We cannot take the risk on that. I played him in one league, my Football Diehards Dynasty League. For those of y'all that are familiar, Mike Dempsey and Bob Harris on the radio and so forth. I'm in a Dynasty League with those guys. I played Dodson in them. Luckily, I still won and already had a playoff spot clinched anyway. But luckily, playing Dodson did not hurt me. Don't play Dodson. Walker's risky with the injury. Zach Sealer, another phenomenal game with 82% of the snaps played. Came up with 2 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, 4 tackles. Beautiful game. Poyer and Holland played 100% of the snaps at safety. Let's move to the Jets versus the Dolphins. Jets played 73 snaps on defense. C.J. Mosley finally got put on IR, so that risk of what would happen to Jamian Sherwood if Mosley came back is now alleviated and gone. Sherwood had a stinker of a game in week 13. In week 14, he comes back with a monster freaking game with 18 tackles, 13 solo, 2 tackles for loss, a pass defense. So after only having 4 solo tackles the week before, came back with a monster game. What that meant for Quincy Williams, who played 99% of the snaps, it meant there was nothing for Quincy to tackle. Sherwood was getting them all. That was, talk about outliers. Quincy Williams on the low side with 2 tackles and 1 solo and laid a big fat egg, and I hope that didn't cost you moving on to the playoffs in any of your leagues. And then you have the other extreme where Sherwood had 18 tackles. I expect those two to regress towards the mean, meaning let's see Sherwood coming back towards, from the 18 to the 10 to 12, and expect Williams to go from the 2 back to the 8, 9, 10 range. That's how I expect this to kind of move towards the mean here as we move forward, as we're looking ahead. Okay. Will McDonald played 83% of the snaps. So when I went through the snap counts to, I'm like, wait a second. When I started taking my initial notes, I don't remember seeing any stats for Will McDonald. I went back and double checked. Sure enough, nada, zilch, zero, none, nothing. Will McDonald, his highest snap count of the year, no stats at all. Okay. And also, you may recall, and you can go back and listen last week, I said they don't have the best of schedules, they being the Jets edge players the rest of the year in terms of teams that give up points to the edge. So that certainly played out for Will McDonald. Hassan Reddick was up all the way to 74% of the snaps. He only had 2 tackles, both of which were solo, and he had a TFL, if I remember correctly, as part of that as well. So Hassan Reddick, as we talked about last week, he's not going to be making up that money that he lost with the incentives added to his contract to get him to come back for his holdout. He's lost that money. He's not going to get it. Okay. Sauce Gardner was out. I usually don't talk much about cornerbacks except for slot cornerbacks. Brandon Echols ended up playing in Sauce's position. He played 97% out wide at the wide corner. Usually when that happens, you don't expect a lot of tackles. And you know what? That is not what happened. He ended up having 10 tackles, 9 solo, and a pass defense. What does that say? The Dolphins found the goose that laid the golden egg, and that was Brandon Echols, and they picked on him like mad. And he was giving up the catches, but he was making the tackles afterwards, which was good. But so if he plays again, it's risky, but teams had to see how open those wide receivers are, and also they're going to pick on Echols. So I didn't look up who the Jets play, but he could play. He could be someone we play in cornerback leagues, depending on who the Jets play. Keep an eye on if Sauce is inactive again. If Sauce is active, Sauce Gardner, that is, to be more specific, we're not playing Echols. The safeties, last week I said, based on the way they were rotating snaps and percents, I'm like, and who was deep and who was in the box and who was in the slot and who played out wide, said, do not play any safeties. After this week, nothing has changed with that. We're not playing any of the Jets. Now, granted, Clark was up to 81% of the snaps. He played 52% of those deep. We're not playing Chuck Clark, folks. Tony Adams played 51%. Isaiah Oliver played 31% of the snaps. Um, and he played a good chunk of that in the slot/box, but we're still not playing him on 31% of the snaps. Jalen Mills, 68%. Ashton Davis, 24%. Folks, stay away from all those guys. If Sauce is back, we're not playing him because teams don't target him. We're not going to play DJ Reed. The only defensive back for the Jets is potentially Brandon Echols if Sauce is out, and if the Jets play a team that throw a lot and throw well. Okay, that's the Jets. We're moving on. The Patriots were on bye, and that concludes the AFC East, and now we're going to move to the AFC North. And in the AFC North, we are going to start with the Bengals, who played only 60 snaps on defense. They look like Swiss cheese, folks. So thank goodness they only played 60 snaps. Luckily, the Cowboys, some turnovers, some snafus on special teams. Sorry for you Cowboys fans out there for that mistake. But here we are. Logan Wilson went on IR. If you listen to the Start Sit show on this past Sunday morning, you heard us talk about the fact that we are very comfortable playing Akeem Davis Gaither in place of Logan Wilson, along with Jermaine Pratt. We've been confident and comfortable playing Jermaine Pratt as well this year. Davis Gaither only played 88% of the snaps, but actually led the team in tackles with 5 of which were solo and a tackle for loss. Jermaine Pratt, 100% of the snaps, 7 tackles, 3 solo, tackle for loss, and a pass defense. The safety rotation, which we've been talking about for weeks, is continuing to be trending towards battle. And this battle, for lack of a better term, is basically almost over with Jordan Battle playing 87% of the snaps, Von Bell all the way down to 13%, with Von Bell not having any stats on those 13% of the snaps. The good thing about Jordan Battle, too, is they only played 29% of the snaps deep. Now, granted, the Bengals were only out there for 60% of these snaps, but the way they were getting run on through the front line, and it's getting to linebackers and then a little bit more to the secondary as well. And if Battle's going to be playing closer to the line, that could be a potential interesting player to put into our lineups. Not the first person I'm jumping to play in, because remember, he still only played 87%. He didn't play 100. But it looks like that shift is occurring. Battle, you could potentially play in your deeper leagues. Sam Hubbard, so on the edge, played a season-low 38% of the snaps. Joseph Asai was in that 50% range where he's been for a little bit now. Miles Murphy, the number 1 draft pick from a year ago, played a season-high 57%. Hubbard season-low, Murphy a season-high. Hubbard finished with 1 assisted tackle, which I believe is the second time in 2 weeks or 3 weeks that he's done that. We've talked about him long gone. Okay, move on. Joseph Asai, exact same stats for the second week in a row: 3 tackles, 3 solo, 1 sack, 1 TFL, 2 quarterback hits. That's 3 games in a row with a sack for Osai. In one of my leagues, I traded for Trey Hendrickson, and the same thing plays to also. You can use and apply to Osai as well. The next 2 weeks are juicy matchups for Cincinnati edge players. So if you need an edge player, Joseph Asai, even at 50%, I'm willing to put him in because there's a chance his snap count goes up even further here, because they even rushed him a little bit from the interior in this past game. Miles Murphy finished with 4 tackles, 3 solo, not someone we're putting to our lineups, even though his snap rate was at a season high. On to the Browns, who played 65 snaps on defense. The linebacker story went like this. Jordan Hicks led and played 100% of the snaps, but he had a lousy 5 tackles, 2 which were solo in a pass defense. That's Jordan Hicks and his inconsistency. 65 snaps is average, so he should have done better than that. That's all I got to say. Mohamed Diabete, who I butcher his name every week. Y'all know that. Thanks for bearing with me on that. Played 83% of the snaps, 7 tackles, 2 solo, and a tackle for loss. Devin Bush, the 3rd linebacker, when they do use 3 linebackers, played 46% of the snaps, 6 tackle, 1 solo, tackle for loss. Browns coach Kevin Stefanski also said JOK is not going to play in Week 15. Remember, he had the gruesome neck injury, went on IR, or head/neck injury. That was a brutal looking play. Luckily, it wasn't anything that was deemed, quote, long term. But at this point in time, I can't see the Browns activating him off of IR. I could be wrong, but I'd be shocked if they do with where they are at this point in the year. Myles Garrett picked up a sack for you, and he also had 3 quarterback hits on 75% of snaps. That's another one. I got to admit, I was a little bit wrong, folks. With all the injuries he had earlier this year, I really thought in redrafts I was looking to move on from him, and I was wrong on that one. Play him with confidence. You got to play Myles Garrett. Grant Delpit played 97% of the snaps, had 6 tackles and only 1 solo. The other Brown safeties we've been talking about, we got this rotation with Hickman and McLeod and Thornhill. We're not playing any of those guys. We pass on them. The Ravens were on bye. Lastly, the Steelers from the AFC North. They played 72 snaps on defense. Deshaun Elliott was at 88%. We talked about last week. When he's playing in that 88, 90, 92% range, it's great, and we can play him because he's so efficient in tackling, and he had 13 tackles, 9 solo on those 88% of the snaps. Now, there were some previous weeks where he was in that 70 to 75% range. I'm taking the gamble. He's so hyper efficient. I'm going to play Elliott in my lineups if I have him. Okay, just so let y'all know what I would do, and I have him in the league, so I'm going to play him. Patrick Queen, 100% of the snaps at linebacker, as he typically does, but only 5 solo and 1 pass defense. He is just not putting, for the most part, out the IDP stats that we want and need. Someone in shallow leagues in particular, you should be able to put someone else in his spot. Peyton Wilson, 49% of the snaps. Landon Roberts, 39% of the snaps. Peyton Wilson, 4 solo tackles and a tackle for loss. Landon Roberts had a big play during the game, a big stop, 3 tackles, 1 solo, 1 tackle for loss. So not much counting stats. We're not playing Wilson or Roberts right now. Cameron Haywood continues to amaze at either age 35 or 36 or close to 36. I can't remember for sure. Just freaking amazing. 5 tackles, 3 solo, 2 of which were sacks, which means 2 TFLs, 2 quarterback hits. You know the drill. And that was only on 61% of the snaps. There's been some weeks he's played up to 80%. You got Hayward, you're playing Hayward. Alex Highsmith returned from injury, but he only played 58% of the snaps. Luckily, he got a sack and a couple of quarterback hits to go along with the 3 tackles, 2 of which were solo. I expect that number to go up. He was playing in the, somewhere in the low 80s to high 80s%. I think it's going to be more towards the lower 80% because Nick Herbig was so impressive while he was gone. Plus, they traded for Preston Smith, and I expect him to get 20, 25% of the snaps as well. Well, maybe a little bit less than that. But so I expect both TJ Watt and Highsmith to maybe not play as close to 90% of snaps, play 80% of the snaps on the edge with some relief from Herbig and Preston Smith. But I'm still playing Watt and I'm still playing Highsmith. I do expect Highsmith to get back up to that 80% range. I don't think it stays in this 58% range. Okay. We are going to move to the AFC South now, everybody. And we're going to start with the Colts, and they're on bye. So then now we're going to move on to the Jaguars. The Jaguars played 65 snaps on defense after 63 last week, but then 80 and 84 the weeks before. Mac Jones, while not perfect by any stretch of the means, and particularly in the second halves of both of these last 2 games, has actually had this ball control offense where they've controlled the ball, move slowly down the field, haven't scored a ton of points necessarily, but that is at least keeping the defense, unfortunately, from playing these 80 and 84 snaps like they were the previous weeks, okay? That's some of the bad news in that, well, it's not that bad in that they're playing roughly an average amount of snaps. The good news, though, Foye Oluokun played 100% of the snaps, which I'd almost given up on. And he had 11 tackles, 6 of which were solo. And he only played 8% of the snaps on the D-line and not as much on the edge, more along the interior. That was great news. Devin Lloyd played 77% of the snaps only, though. And he had 8 tackles and only 1 solo. And he played 16% of the snaps on the D-line. So it feels like Oluokun and Lloyd might have shifted spots during this game from what it had been previously. For Oluokun owners, fantastic. Not so much for Lloyd owners, which would explain only having 1 solo tackle for Lloyd. Ventrell Miller, Okay, I'm looking through the floor in well, there's no hole in my floor, but that's what it feels like. Fintrell Miller fell through. He was all the way down to 28% of the snaps. There was no word of any injury. He did play 100% of those in the box, which was great, but 2 tackles, 1 solo. You, with that surprise, you cannot play Ventrell Miller in your fantasy lineups in the playoffs. In fact, I saw that before our waivers run in the Kings Classic League, the owner of him, the godfather of IDP, Gary Davenport, actually dropped Ventrell Miller. At least I think it was Gary. Sorry if I'm wrong, Gary, if you happen to be watching this. But anyway, you can't change playing Ventrell Miller. We hope, we pray, we keep our fingers crossed. We, our lucky rabbit's foot, whatever it is, that this continues for Luakan. And Lloyd, I'm sorry, folks, is pretty risky going into Week 15 in playoffs. At the safety position, we're playing none of these guys. Savage played 91%. Talked about him being an outlier, leading the team in tackles last week. He was back down to normal, 2 solo tackles. We never play Savage. Antonio Johnson, 59%. Andre Cisco, 62%. Can't play any of these guys. Josh Hines Allen had a sack for the second straight week. Has very favorable matchups, not necessarily in Week 15, but 16 and 17 for he and Trayvon Walker. Keep that in mind. The Texans were on bye, so the last team in the AFC South is the Tennessee Titans versus the Jaguars. They played 59 snaps. They've been all over the board, with previous weeks being 84, 56, 73, 59, so up and down in terms of snaps being played. If Mason Rudolph plays because of Levis's re-injuring his shoulder, which something is to monitor, I do expect that they will play a little bit lesser snaps on defense, because I think Rudolph can sustain drives a little bit more. It doesn't mean they're going to score a bunch more points on offense and all that kind of stuff, but he can sustain drives a little bit more, work the clock a little bit more than Levis. So I expect them to be more in the 63, 65 range of snaps on defense. Kenneth Murray and Jerome Baker were both inactive. If you'd join our IDP Plus Starts show, haven't mentioned that yet? If you haven't, you might want to listen. There's some good stuff in there. Recommended playing Luke Gifford. Didn't want to take the chance on Otis Reese in the other position because I was also worried about the rookie Cedric Gray, particularly with them being out of the playoff race, basically. But it was 100% for Gifford, 98% for Reese. Gifford wore the green dot, if you're wondering. Gifford, that number 1 linebacker position, has been very productive for the Titans. And Gifford had 12 tackles, 9 solo, 1 tackle for loss. Otis Reese at the 98% was also very productive with 7 tackles, 4 solo, tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and he got an interception, which means he also got a pass defense. So Reese was also very productive as well as that number 2 linebacker. What is the thing to watch? Does Murray play? Does Baker play? If both of them are back, well, let's start with Murray first. If Murray's back, I expect Murray and Gifford to play, with Gifford being productive, but maybe not as efficient as we just talked about in this past game. If Murray and Baker are back, Baker's been playing so badly that I could still see Gifford playing. The problem is, unless they actually announce that, you'd be taking quite the gamble to play Gifford over Baker. So my gut, my crystal ball says if Murray and Baker are both back, that is Murray and Gifford, but I can't guarantee that, folks. So it'd be a real risk to play Gifford. Okay, so that's what I'm sharing with you. Same with Baker. If Baker's back, it's a real risk to play him too. I'm trying to stay away with probably from either one of those, unless there's some sort of announcement that says Murray and Baker are back, but Murray and Gifford are starting. Last week's Fool's Gold, Darryl Worley. Last week played 99% of the snaps and had a whopping 17 tackles, 8 of which were solo. But he also played 48% of the snaps deep. And I warned you guys, don't play him. Maybe you pick him up, but don't play him. This week, 100% of the snaps, a whopping 5 tackles, 4 solo on 61% of the snaps deep. We're not playing Darryl Worley. If you took a chance and stashed him on the end of the bench, go ahead and drop him now. Pick up someone else from the many that we talked about during the show. All right, last but certainly not least, the AFC West. And if I don't forget, I am going to come back and talk about something on the New Orleans Saints that I bypassed too quickly. So we're going to come back and talk about the Saints a little bit more. The Broncos were on bye. Let's talk about the Chargers. A lot to talk about on the Chargers, though. Denzel Perriman rolled out before the game. Junior Colson, the rookie from Michigan, where Harbaugh and his defensive coordinator mentor came from, and to the Chargers. He was activated from IR. So what happened? Hanley still played 100% of the snaps, 8 tackles, 6 solo pass defense. Fantastic. Troy Dye was all the way down from 74% of the snaps to 48%. Colson played 19% of the snaps. He only had 2 tackles, 2 solo. Elijah Moden played a quasi third linebacker spot as well. Moden played 100% of the snaps, and I say quasi because he played about 37% of those in the box like a linebacker. What do I think happens going forward? Henley continues to play 100%. Colson ramps up, Dye ramps down. They use Moden a little bit in the box, but not nearly as much as this past week. That's how I think this all plays out as we move forward. By the way, Nick Neiman didn't play any snaps at linebacker this past week. Alohi Gilman was on IR. Tony Jefferson was inactive. So what happened in the safety position? We talked about Moden a little bit. He played 37% in the box, but he also played 62% more of a deeper alignment. Okay. So he did get moved around in a lot of unfavorable positions as well as some favorable spots. Got to be careful about playing Moden. Marcus May played 88% of the snaps. He got 5 tackles, 3 solo pass defense. He played 70% of his snaps deep. Derwin James, thank goodness he got that sack. Otherwise, he would have had quite the goose egg in the scoring system, and hopefully you have big play scoring where you get a lot of points for sacks, because otherwise he had 2 total tackles, one of which was that sack, and that was it. He had one other one in the fourth quarter, if I remember correctly. He only played 6% deep, but particularly I noticed in the second half, and I didn't get a chance to study the whole game, he shadowed Kelsey quite a bit in that second half, and he was focused on shutting down Kelsey as best he could. And as a result, the other tackles and some of the blitzing that he does, he didn't do as much, etc. So expect Derwin James to pop back up next week. We're not playing Marcus May. We're weary about playing Moden, even with Gilman on IR, and particularly if Jefferson comes back as well, we're weary about playing him and Moden. Nope, stay away. Okay. Summarizing all of that, we're playing Derwin James at the safeties, and we're probably avoiding everything else right now. Related to the 4 edge rushers on the Chargers to wrap up the Chargers. Tuli T was up a little bit to 55% of the snaps. You may recall when he was on that hot sack streak, where he had a bunch of sacks over 3 weeks. That changed here. He did get half a sack this week. He got 2 tackles, one of which was solo, but he's nowhere near playing the 80% of the snaps that he was during that sack streak. So we expected that pullback. We talked about that. That has continued. Great that he got a half a sack that he shared with Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack was all the way up to 68% of the snaps. At one point, Mack was in the high 70s, low 80s. That could trend up as well, particularly if there's any injuries. Joey Bosa was at 61% of the snaps. He did get a sack, but he also had a couple of offsides as well. Bud Dupree, who was a fool's gold a few weeks back, played 32% of the snaps, got 0 sacks. I believe he had a tackle or maybe 1 solo, 1 assisted, but not much to write about there. So we're cautious about playing Tuli T. We're rolling with Mac. We're playing Joey Bosa in deeper leagues on the edge. Thing with Joey Bosa, we talked about a lot. Do worry about him getting hurt. That's my one caution if you're going to play with Joey Bosa. That is the risk you're taking. Let's go to the Raiders to wrap up the AFC West. They played 63 snaps on defense. We had a Trevin Morig sighting, and I butchered his name. I'm sorry. He played 100% of the snaps as he had been doing. This week, though, 8 tackles, 5 solo, half a sack, 3 pass defense, 1 quarterback hit. There wasn't a radical change in his usage on the field. In fact, he played 31% deep versus the previous week where he played only 23% deep. For whatever reason, he racked up the stats versus the Bucs. So because of how he's being used in the field, I think you take the chance on playing him here in the fantasy playoffs, but it's a bit of a risk. Spillane had 100% of the snaps, only had 7 tackles, 5 solo, a little bit disappointing. Darnay Holmes, we're not chasing his points at cornerback as an FYI. Pass. Next. Kayvon Chason, one of my LSU guys from the past. I actually called him fool's gold previously. Maybe I was wrong. I'm not willing to say I was 100% wrong yet. He was up to 45% of the snaps, which is the most he's played since he joined the Raiders. He's had 4 tackles this past week, with 3 of those being solo, half a sack, which means he got a tackle for loss and a quarterback hit. He also had an interception, which means he had a pass defense on a great read that he made off the edge. So he did, a really standout game. We're not putting him into our lineups. We're keeping an eye maybe for dynasty. But since I called him at his fool's gold, gave it a little bit grief, I want to tell you, maybe it's not fool's gold. We're still watching Tyree Wilson as well. He might be fool's gold as well. Okay, so those a couple of Raiders edge players. On to Max Crosby. Played 100% of the snaps, which I believe is 7 weeks in a row, since the high ankle injury when he didn't play 100% of the snaps. But unfortunately, he did not have a sack again this week. So he's had one in the last, I can't remember. I called that he was going to have one in week 13, and he did. I didn't call one for week 14, and he didn't. I'm a little bit worried. I did a quick check on PFF. He is way down at number 59 in terms of pass rush win rate. Once again, shout out to PFF for a lot of these alignment stats that I give you all. That's courtesy of PFF and a good one to invest in. Okay, but way down at number 59. That's not where he usually is. He's usually in the top 10 to 15. Is it the high ankle injury? Is it the multiple 2 and 3 people chipping him? Is it the fact that he is just frustrated at the continual losing? Whatever it is, it's not translating. He's not an automatic start, unfortunately. I know I said it slightly different last week, but depending on what my options are and who the Raiders happen to be playing, I may or may not be playing Max Crosby. Okay, don't think of him as an automatic start. Look at all your options. Divine Diablo played only 61% of the snaps, and he had no stats. For a linebacker to play 61% of the snaps and have nothing, nada, zero, zilch stats, that's pretty bad. We should be way beyond Divine Diablo. And Alontae Taylor's still on the outside because Amadi's got that slot position locked down. Alontae Taylor is a high risk, folks. Hard to trust him in the playoffs right now. You can't look at just the season to date and saying I'm automatically putting Alontae Taylor in. Brian Bresee now has 3.5 sacks in the last 3 games. He has been boom or bust. He's been more boom lately. Like I said, 3.5 sacks in the last 3 games. He also had, like this past game, he had a couple of pass defenses. He blocked the field goal to save the game for the Saints in that 14-11 game that set the NFL backwards, as I said earlier. But anyway, so that's Brian Bresee, and that's the Saints. And sorry, I went past them earlier. My apologies. And with that brings us to a close, everybody. I hope this was helpful for all of you in terms of getting you ready for your playoffs. Join us at IDP Plus, 20% off with the code PROPS. I'm Ricky Rodriguez. Find me at RickyRod66. Lots of great shows on our IDP Plus YouTube channel as a reminder. And also, because I plugged it a few times because I'm a part of it, but please join us for the IDP Plus Start Sit show. Been seeing a lot of you all. Hope you all will continue to come out and ask us your question. Let us help you out on Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern. With that, we'll wrap it up. Be kind to one another. Be safe. I hope to see you on Sunday, and good luck in week 15.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.